that's going to hurt you. I mean, I was behind Floyd Landis when he crashed. Nobody saw this but me. I had a perfect seat. I was 15 meters behind him. Right as we crested Sugarloaf and heading down the upper part of Power Line, and you got those first couple rutted, decomposed gravel sections, and he just went into one of those a little too hot. And I don't know how much he'd been riding a mountain bike, but he just slid out. Probably going 25 miles an hour. That didn't help his race at all. He had a big old, in the photos from that race, you can see he's got a big old tear in his shorts and road rash. And you don't need that. That doesn't help your confidence. That doesn't help you go fast.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race, the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest and hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. Hottie and Fatty here with a great bonus episode, an interview with Dave Wiens, a 6-time winner of the Leadville Trail 100.
Yeah, Hottie, we contacted Dave originally to get his thoughts on pacing tactics for the Leadville 100, but wound up having this great conversation about much more. And so we wanted to share it with our listeners. There is a ton of good information here. Dave really knows his stuff, obviously, partly from having won this race so many times, partly from having taught the Leadville 100 Camp of Champions several times. Chances are if a racer has a question about the Leadville 100, he's already heard it and he knows the answer.
Yeah, he's a totally approachable guy. You'll probably see him around town in Leadville if you are there for the race. Go up, talk to him, take a picture with him, ask him questions. He's open to all that stuff. But it was great getting with him, talking with him. We get into bike choice, pacing, nutrition, the Race Across the Sky movies, his up-close and personal view of Floyd Landis' crash, and a lot more. But first, this episode is presented by The Feed. One of the most important parts of having a great Leadville 100 is training the way you plan to race, and that's definitely true with your nutrition. TheFeed.com is a great way to get and train with whatever you're going to eat on race day. The Feed has an incredible variety, great recommendations, and training advice from their staff, fast shipping, and great pricing.
Yeah, I swear by The Feed. And I get all my big ride nutrition there, from pre-race bonk breaker bars, goo octane gels, the Morton's race drink mix. You and I both had good luck with that. But whether you choose to follow my lead for nutrition or if you have your own food strategy, chances are you can find the kind of food, the brand of food, the amount of food that you need at The Feed.
Check them out at thefeed.com/Leadville and use the code Leadville15 for a 15% discount on the Leadville training and racing packs. And now let's bring in Dave Wiens.
Dave, welcome to Leadville. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
You have won the Leadville 100 how many times?
6 times.
6 times. With inflation, I think we can increase that to 8, right?
That's right.
So tell me, how big of a part did working with other racers play in your wins?
Well, typically the race always starts out as a group, but I guess not always. Mm-hmm. The first year, I was alone pretty quickly when I was racing against Bryson Perry. And, thinking back to those earlier years, there was a bit of a group together, but really beginning in 2000 and even in 2007, the group didn't stay together that long. I guess the most interesting race, or the first time it really stayed together, was 2008, the first time that Lance raced. Mm-hmm. We were a group of, 15 or 20 halfway up Columbine. Which was really interesting. And it was because no one was really pushing the pace at the front. Manny Prado got a gap on the power line descent, but anytime someone gets a gap from the group there and they're out by themselves, you're not too concerned about them typically. Maybe it's changed now with some of the faster folks that are up front, but it all came back together and it stays in a group. And I think that's really the dynamic you're seeing now. Even in these faster times, is like when you get Todd Wells and Albin and Christian, when those guys were doing it a few years ago when they really set the record, a group of 3 or 4 works really hard, but together, probably out until at least Twin Lakes, and just to get that advantage of trading off poles.
Dave, the first time I spoke to you was actually in the fall of 2009 when the first Race Across the Sky movie came out. I actually interviewed you about that movie for the radio station I was working for. And during that race, I would say you were famously beaten by Lance Armstrong. But not only that, Lance used Matt Shriver at the front of that race to really establish a very, very hard pace that started on Keevens. And I remember you afterwards, your expressions afterwards about how hard that race was early on. Was there ever any discussion or resentment or any bad feeling about the use of a pacer in that sense and putting somebody on the front and having them drive that hard?
No, I've heard that a lot from people, and people will say, oh, they ganged up on you. I answer that question the same every single time. I had every opportunity to follow the same wheel, and I just wasn't fit enough to do it. And Lance was. He was able to hold that pace. I remember I got gapped on, middle to upper St. Keevens, and I just, had to claw my way back on the upper sort of rolling part of St. Keevens. And then I don't even know I can't remember if I got on, toward the end of the dirt section or on the road, but I never looked at that as a disadvantage for me, because had I had the fitness and the ability, I would have had that same wheel. So I never looked at it that way at all.
I don't know if you've been following what's been happening like at Dirty Kansas and some of the gravel races. There has been some grumbling about pacing and about helping others and doing that. Have you ever heard any of that? I mean, it seems like Leadville has always been kind of immune to that. People pace each other at that race all the time. I've never heard, in the 6 times I've been there, anyone really complain about someone pacing another.
Right. Now, are you talking a non-competitor pacing a competitor?
I'm talking about, in fact, a competitor being paced by their husband, who's a pro rider,
who isn't in the or is also in the race.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, no, I would not be in favor of that, just because you're taking two different categories and you're mixing them together. Now, What is interesting about Leadville is that the men and the women race together, and the start is so chaotic. And as a woman, you have the potential to get on a group maybe that your competitor didn't get on. I mean, there's things like that going on. But as far as the men's field, that's interesting. I can imagine that, but I have never heard anybody complain about that at Leadville. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but it certainly isn't the case up front. But you know what? Someone could easily just pace somebody the whole way through, and they could be riding a wheel the whole way to a time that they otherwise might not be able to attain. So I think that would be a little bit lame.
I wanted to go to for a normal competitor, for normal people who are showing up at this race and are just really caring about their own personal time, about getting across the finish line in the best possible time. What would be the advice that you would give to them?
Well, the advice I give to everybody is to pace very carefully, and then pace even more carefully than that. If you have that capacity, some people are pretty new to the sport and they just don't really have a solid understanding of what that means and what their limits are when they're pacing. I try to impress upon people how much enthusiasm there is at the start of that race. You've been thinking about it for months. You've been training for it. There's excitement in the air, and you're off, and you just coasted down the hill, and you're starting to ride. You feel pretty good. Of course you do. The race has just started, and a lot of people go way too hard in the beginning, and it's additionally difficult because all those enthusiastic people, if you're going to pace carefully, you might be getting passed by a lot of people thinking, what's wrong with me? I need to go faster. All these people are passing me, but I've always let people know that if you get passed by 150 people, if you pace carefully and you're strong all the way to the end, you're going to pass 400 or 500 in the end. So it doesn't matter what happens in any portion of the race. What happens is how it ends up. So that careful pacing is so important. And then if they're using the race itself for support or their drop bags, if people are worried about their cutoff times and things like that, and they're pretty close, they shouldn't languish in the aid stations. Get in there, get your stuff, and get your bike, get your pocket stuff, whatever it takes, refill your bottles, and get back on your bike and go. I don't think it's doing you any good to sit in a chair, for example.
Yeah.
Maybe, but I just don't see that. I see, you've trained to ride 100 miles. You're sitting down on your bike anyway. You might as well be sitting on your saddle pedaling as opposed to sitting in a chair going nowhere.
Yeah.
But the pacing part is really, really important. And I think that can make or break a lot of people's races. And it certainly does every year.
Dave, we've seen 6 hours broken now at Leadville. What do you think is possible there?
I think it would be possible to go a whole lot faster than that if you had bigger teams of strong riders. That was done with 3 or 4 guys working hard, and then they were alone probably at least a third of the race, if not longer. If you had, like the tour style teams where you had domestiques and, you had a bunch of guys up front who were really strong and a big group stayed together. I think that, but I don't know that that's ever going to happen there. So, right. But you know what? Records continue to get pushed back. And there was a time when I was riding it when people were like, man, what would it be like to break 7 hours? And then, we broke 7 hours. It was like, whoa. And then now they've taken an hour out of that, an hour. So that leads me to believe that, more time can be taken out. Do
you have a number? Do you think 5.5 is possible?
Oh boy, that'd be cranking. I tell you what,
yeah.
You know what? I don't even know, but it just depends on. I think you'd have to have help. I don't think you'd ever get someone just time trial into that alone. It takes that group, and if you had a bigger group all the way back, I think you could make up some. I'm not saying it's impossible. That'd be remarkable.
Yeah, it would.
But I just don't know if we're going to see anything like that.
Where are the places where you think racers really should be looking for people to work together?
Well, and again, this is assuming that you are comfortable drafting, and several people in that field, they're not even comfortable drafting, I don't think. But I'd be looking for a wheel, obviously, from the start, rolling down the hill, the flats all the way across toward the bottom of St. Kevin's, and then. Really, if you're an experienced rider, you're looking for that wheel everywhere you can. Obviously, where it's faster and rockier and more technical, you're not going to be right on somebody's wheel, nor would you want to be. But you certainly want to try to, get on that wheel on all the paved sections, going down Turquoise Lake, around the lake, climbing back up on Hagerman Pass. That's a gravel road. It's a good place to be on a wheel. Certainly, the section between the bottom of Powerline and the pavement, the big, I call it the big L, even though it's actually more like a Z, I guess. That goes from the bottom of the power line descent all the way to the pipeline aid station. A lot of pavement in there, and usually pretty gusty winds in there. Great to be on a wheel there. But even that whole next section all the way to the base of Columbine, there's a draft to be had, and even going up Columbine, if you can be on somebody's wheel. Part of that too is just pacing. If someone is going a pace that's pretty good for you, or there's a group working and you're able to get into a group and take just a little tiny pull every now and then, or some people will just kind of end up cycling toward the back of a big group, and there might be 6 guys up front who never really want to relinquish those top 6 positions. They'll do all the work, and you've got this whole string of riders behind you that are just sitting on. So that's what I think is really so compelling about the Leadville 100 is, to me, it's a road race on mountain bikes.
Even though a lot of racers will show up there alone and feeling like they're alone, they won't be, and they'll find that out real quickly. Dave, is all they have to do is look around, and they'll find their peeps pretty soon. And it's probably a good idea, wouldn't you say, to find that group and stay with it as much as you can?
Absolutely. If you find a group or even a single rider or a couple riders that you're pretty well matched for, stick with them. And then as soon as they're starting to not go fast enough for you, or maybe you're starting to hurt a little bit trying to stay with them, you'll know, and it might be time to either fall back or to move up. But sometimes we get ambitious and we want to move up to the next group. But you can, the saying we like to use is burn matches, which is, basically you're using fuel, and you'll burn a few extra matches by bridging up to the next group. But if you're fit and you can back it up, you might be able to do that. And that's going to be how you might end up setting a PR, or being able to meet your goals as far as your time. And maybe you didn't get a great lineup, or you had a poor start, and you find yourself having to ride out in the front on your own. But absolutely, find your people, as you say, and stick with them. But always being mindful of, is this a little too easy, a little too hard? Especially if it's a little too hard, you might want to back off and look behind you, and you might see a big group that's 40 meters behind you that you can fall back to those guys and get on with them for a while or something.
As someone who has exploded at mile 60 before, and who has also had pretty good days, that's a hard place to find. Do you have any tips or guidance for finding the pace that is going to work for you for 100 miles?
Well, yeah, it is so hard. And when I first started to do the Leadville 100, I never had raced 100 miles, so I didn't really understand it. And I would get on a climb and I'd say, okay, I think I can maintain this. And then I would back off from that, to where I was actually feeling a little bit silly sometimes going up some of the climbs. Like, man, I know I can ride harder than this. But by the end of the race, you can barely turn the pedals over. So that it was the right decision to do it that way. So I do think for inexperienced riders, it's hard, because automatically I think they just tend to go a little harder than they should.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of discipline to really ratchet it back and go slow. And I think an important idea for people to understand is how important it is that you're efficient at every step of the way. And think about the little ways that you can use extra energy that aren't helping you. For example, I know that men especially get into little mini battles with other guys, and I call them passing games. Like someone will pass you, and then you're like, oh, this guy's not going to pass me. I'm going to pass him, and then no, I'm going to pass him back. And you're just you're doing silly things, or someone will cut them off or something, and they'll start screaming and yelling, and the whole entire race is about efficiency from start to finish. You want to be as careful with your your fuel resources and your energy as you can, and every bit of your energy needs to be put into driving the bike forward in an efficient way.
I'm glad you brought up fuel. Fatty and I have been talking a lot about eating, as we love to do on any time, whether it be a podcast or not. Dave, give us some spots. Give us some your secret spots where you like to grab a bite to eat, because on a mountain bike, you're rattling around, certainly coming down Columbine, you're going over 30 miles an hour. Probably a bad time to reach into your pocket. So are there spots on the course where I can grab something to eat right here, where it's a nice spot to get something in your mouth?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, any of the paved sections are ideal places to do that. You're not going to, you can get a goo packet down, take a drink out of your bottle, hit your Camelback just about anywhere. But as far as, getting something, a power bar or a sandwich or anything that you have a wrapper that you have to deal with, the downhill pavement early in the race around Turquoise Lake can be pretty fast, and you have to be careful doing that. It definitely bottoms out at the bottom, and then it climbs a little bit before it hits the dirt. That's a great place if you're trying to do sort of systematic fueling. Sometimes people will set their watch to go off at a certain time, but that doesn't work, because your watch might beep going, like you say, going down power line or something. You need to pick places on the course, like I'm going to eat here, I'm going to eat here. All of the pavement around the fish hatchery before Pipeline is good. There are sections between Pipeline and Twin Lakes that are good. The lower part of Columbine, after the initial climb, which is a little steeper, then it mellows out a little bit before you get about 2/3 of the way up, and it really gets steep. Once you get up there, it becomes really hard to take anything in on the climb or on the descent, unless you're walking with your bike, perhaps, and if you're having to push a section. But it takes extra energy and breathing to chew and swallow while you're really going hard. So that's why typically on a smooth downhill or a smooth flat section where you don't have to work that hard, where you can get down, whatever it is that you're trying to take on.
For you, what was that? What were you trying to take on? What were you eating? What were you drinking?
I would use the GU nutrition products, mainly the drink mix, Roctane drink mix,
right,
and the gels. That was my staple, and then I would always augment that with some real food. Usually I'd pick up a peanut butter and jelly bagel from my wife, Susan, at Twin Lakes inbound, coming back in. And I would screw that thing down. Literally, it's very, very hard to get those things down.
Oh, yeah.
Between the Twin Lakes aid station and Pipeline. And then this is probably more just, I don't know if it actually helped, but I would pick up a can of double shot, a Starbucks double shot from Susan, more superstition, I think, at Pipeline, and carry it all the way over Power Line, which is probably stupid. And then I would crack that thing over there on the Hagerman Pass Road. But just that different taste, because by then you're getting probably kind of tired of your gels and your drink mix. Just that different sort of coffee, sweet, and then maybe a little boost of caffeine to help me get to the finish line. Again, I don't know if it helped, but once you get into a pattern and you start doing things, a lot of times you don't change it up much. I did hear something that was intriguing to me, and I've tried it in a race or two since, and I kind of like it. It was Christoph Sauser eating an avocado and Parmesan sandwich. So I just ate one of those in the growler here a few weeks ago, and it was a long race where I needed some real food. And I am an advocate of eating some real food. I feel like it's, for me anyway, it'd be really hard to do a big effort like that just on gels and energy drink. So I always try to get that one, solid peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something like that. Something simple, but real, maybe 2/3 of the way through the race.
Let's talk to that top 2% of racers out there real quick, although they're not, the majority of the folks that show up. But for the guy who's got real high goals, not just a gold buckle, but breaking the 8-hour limit, which to me is a real benchmark. That goes beyond just riding that thing. You're now really racing it. What do you think of the keys to breaking 8 hours at Leadville?
Well, if that's interesting. If you've never done it before and you really don't know how your fitness and skill set is going to stack up against the course, I think there are established splits that you could be shooting for. And then you would know I need to be at, Pipeline at this time and Twin Lakes outbound at this time and the top of Columbine at this time. And you can see how you're doing. And there's plenty of pacing information out there. But that doesn't do you any good if that pace is too hard for you. And you're just, you're going as hard as you can and you're slowly falling more behind. So, I mean, that's really, in my mind, where the training and the preparation comes in. You have to be prepared for that course. And to me, Leadville has everything. People get hyper-focused on the climbs. And yes, there are a lot of climbs in that course, but there's also little, what I call poppers, little kickers that there's probably, 8 or 10 or 12 of them that really take their toll over the course of a race like that. There are a lot of flats in the race that are, pretty much flat. That's a whole different style of riding. I feel like Leadville represents just about every possible kind of riding. You could have steep granny gear, loose and tricky like the power line climb or upper part of the Columbine. You've got some fairly moderate paved climbs and gravel climbs. So as a bike racer, I always made sure that my training hit on all of those different kinds of riding. On St. Kevin's, there's a couple of poppers. Between Twin Lakes and the bottom of Columbine, there's a couple of poppers where to get up and over the top, you've really got to tax your body. And if you haven't done that in training, those efforts during the race are going to take their toll. But if everything that you encounter on that course is something that you're hitting on in your training, then not only is your body better prepared for it, but mentally you're prepared for it. It doesn't crush you when, for example, you have to do something like that. And for the average person, I tell them, I know you're going to feel really silly about this, but you're going to be pushing your bike a lot. Why would you not train to push your bike? And you guys remember back in the day when we used to have to go up the Cobra or the North Face, whatever it was called. Yeah. That was a 250 or 300 vertical foot hike a bike. Plus in those days, I would push a good bit of that really steep section of power line too. Yep. So when I got off my bike, I wanted to know that I was strong pushing my bike. It wasn't, if you've never pushed your bike before and all of a sudden you're faced with pushing up a hill, because the average person is going to be pushing a lot on Columbine. They're going to be pushing a lot on power line. And if you've been doing that in training just once or twice a week, find some steep, nasty hill and push your bike up it so that when it happens in the race, you feel confident and not demoralized, and your legs don't freak out from doing something that's never done before. So that all comes back to train specifically for the elements that you're going to encounter in that race. And in Leadville, there's a lot of different elements that you have to try to cover in training. And people come from places like Dallas and Florida that are dead flat, and they do well in that race. And I love that because they're not able to. I'm so lucky here. I can go out, I can ride at 12,000 feet. I can find a simulation for everything that Leadville has, and I can train for it. There are people that do that race every year that don't have that opportunity. and they're just so confident and tough that they don't let that get in their head and bother them, and they still just push through and do really well in the race. So
cast your mind back to the last time you did the Leadville 100. Give me a summary of the bike that you were riding.
It was a 26-inch wheel hardtail.
Yeah.
And that was, it was a lightweight bike, but it was a 26er, and it was a hardtail.
And that was what I was trying to remember, is if you ever rode the Leadville 100 on 29-inch wheels. I don't think you did you?
I didn't. No, I was riding Canyons at that time, and Europe was just a little behind the U.S., and they didn't have a 29-inch wheel bike yet.
If you were going to do this race now, how would you spec out a bike for the Leadville 100 now?
I would ride a 29 hardtail. Like the Canyon Exceed carbon fiber is the bike I'm riding right now, and I raced it here a few weeks ago in near Gunnison in the original Growler. And I'm old school in that the hardtail. I mean, I grew up riding those things. It doesn't bother me. I think they're just so fast. Maybe part of it is mental, but I feel confident that every tiniest bit of my power is propelling the bike forward. And I don't gain enough on the descents to warrant a full suspension. So if I were going to do the Leadville, I would be doing it on a hardtail.
Then talk about the descents real quick then, Dave. What style of rider were you on the descents at Leadville? Did you attack them? Did you just let them happen?
I never attacked descents. I was always a very cautious rider on the descents. And yeah, it's just...
So would that be your advice to others? What would you tell other folks to do?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what kind of descender they are. There's people that's what they do, and they love to descend fast. I would never tell someone who loves to descend fast not to. So, but you don't want your race to end on a descent. That would be silly, especially if you were just maybe riding a little over your head, or even if you weren't over your head. There's a lot of traffic back there. You're having to deal with other riders, and you say on your left, and they hear left, and so they move left. You never know what's going to happen out there. So I always err on the side of caution, but I would never be one to tell somebody how they should descend. But certainly, you could lose a little bit of time on the descents and be cautious and keep your bike running, not flat your tires, all of that kind of stuff. Not take that crash that's gonna hurt you. I mean, I was behind Floyd Landis when he crashed. Nobody saw this but me. I had a perfect seat. I was 15 meters behind him right as we crested Sugarloaf and heading down the upper part of Power Line. And you got those first couple rutted decomposed gravel sections, and he just went into one of those a little too hot. And I don't know how much he'd been riding a mountain bike, but he just slid out, probably going, 25 miles an hour.
Wow.
And, that didn't help his race at all. He had a big in the photos from that race, you can see he's got a big old tear in his shorts and road rash. And, you don't need that. That doesn't help your confidence. That doesn't help you go fast. So sometimes, at least for me, I'll take a little bit of a hit on the descents just to make sure I get to the bottom and try to do what I can on the motor-in sections.
What would it take to bring you back to the Leadville 100?
Of course, you never say never, but I feel like I had such a great 8-year experience there, and it was a real special time of my life. And if I were still, maybe 45, which is I think how old I was the last time I did it, but I'm definitely in that zone where I'm going the other direction with my fitness and everything. And it'd be hard for me to come back. I got to do a lot of the Leadville Race Series races. And I even got to do the stage race for a couple of years. That was great fun. But I really don't see myself ever racing at Leadville again. And it's just because I believe that chapters begin and chapters end. And that's a chapter that for me, at least as far as racing it ended after my race in 2010.
See, now I'm feeling kind of embarrassed as the guy who doesn't apparently have the understanding that chapters actually end.
But everybody's chapters are a different length.
My chapter is the length of a Tolstoy novel, apparently.
Fatty, like I said, the first time I spoke to Dave was at the end of 2009, or rather in the fall of 2009, when the Leadville Race Across the Sky movie came out. It was a great film, and they followed up the next year with another edition when Levi Leipheimer was in the race. Dave, those both those DVDs. I keep them all the time. They are the things I tell people that they should buy and watch over and over if they want to get a good idea of how the Leadville race is run and what to do, especially if you've never been there before. It's perfect recon. I mean, they did a great job of showing you the course. Mm-hmm. That's how I learned how to first show up there in 2011, is I'd watch those races and talk to you a little bit too, which helped. Why do you think another Race Across the Sky movie has not been made?
I don't know. That's a good question. The filmmaker, Frank Mattson, he was a Leadville veteran. That's why those films are so good, is because it wasn't someone who said, hey, let's do this. And by the way, how does it work? It was someone who had done the race several times, knew it inside and out, knew exactly the story he wanted to tell, knew how he wanted to tell it. And, once you've done that twice, it was a huge undertaking for Frank and his crew to do that. I think they captured it at a really special time with Lance Armstrong and then with Levi Leipheimer. And that doesn't take anything away from some of the races that have happened since then. There's just been amazing races, Todd Wells and Albin Licata and Christoph Sauser. But it's quite an undertaking. And honestly, I don't know what the return on investment is for something like that. Maybe it's actually really good, but I don't know exactly. I think that it would take someone else, because I think Frank, he did it twice. I think he probably, felt like that was good for him. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. That's a good question.
Do you think it changed the race for the better? And what did you get out of it in the end?
Yeah, I mean, what it did was I think it brought a lot of people into the sport of mountain biking and cycling. It got people. I've had people tell me that they were on the couch. They were sedentary and they'd never even ridden a mountain bike before. It pulled people in from other sports. I think it did nothing more than add a ton of motivation to a lot of people's lives and a lot of fitness and a fantastic experience. So I think that everything that's happened in Leadville and to the Leadville race has all been for the better, because it's positively affected more people. There might be some grumbling from some old school folks that say it's not the same anymore, or the soul is gone. But just like all chapters end, all things change. And what I will always remind people is, regardless of what happens in town and how it's positioned, as soon as you roll away from 6th and Harrison and you're out on that course, nothing has changed.
Yeah.
The Leadville Race Organization doesn't maintain roads, much to the I'm sure of that. The county does routine maintenance. The Forest Service does routine maintenance. It gets ridden more now before the event, a lot more than it ever used to. So especially if we're in the monsoon cycle and there's consistent rains, a fast groove forms around the course. But it's all natural. And at the end of the day, you still have to pedal your bike up St. Kevin's, Sugarloaf, Columbine, Powerline, St. Kevin's again, get your booty up the boulevard. And that part has never changed. And I don't think it ever will. And that's the essence of the race.
That really is. Wrapping things up, there are a lot of people who are listening to this show who have never done the race before and would love some advice from a guy who has raced it, and in my opinion, better than anyone else has ever done it. What advice would you give to racers who are doing this for the first time?
Well, you've already heard the pacing bit. Pace carefully. Be realistic about how much you've ridden your bike and what your expectations are. If you've done quite a bit of riding and preparation coming in, then you could be a little more confident. If it hasn't worked out and life got in the way of riding your bike a lot, you really need to keep that in mind. And I would also look at it as not necessarily, if you're able to achieve your goals in 1 year and be one and done and call it good, great. But a lot of people might have a goal that they don't achieve the first year. You should look at this as anywhere from a 2 to 5 year project, if that's what you're trying to achieve a certain goal. If you have never ridden the course before and you show up a couple of days before the race and ride it, you're going to learn a lot during that event, and you're going to be able to think of all kinds of ways that you can get better. If you have the time to go to the Leadville Camp of Champions, or to go out there in advance and pre-ride sections of the course, talk to people, that's only going to help your chances. Go to a qualifier to improve your lineup in the corral. That's going to improve your chances. But if you're just out there and you want to have a fun day, you want to have a good attitude, you want to tune out all of the noise that you'll hear about you got to do this or you got to do that, because there is no one single paved path to success. Success has been achieved in a lot of different ways at that event. And don't ever let someone tell you have to do it a certain way, because they're wrong. It's definitely been done in a different way. You get a lot of that. So people will say, oh yeah, if you don't do this, you're screwed. And be mindful of your nutrition, but don't overeat and overdrink. I think some people succumb to that. They think that just putting more and more calories in their body is somehow going to get them up the hill and get them to the finish line. So just be cautious. I think everything in moderation. But I tell you what, there is there's absolutely no substitute for a positive attitude when you're out there. And just go out there, get started, enjoy the experience. Give it everything you can. Again, being mindful of pacing, and you should have a great day. And if it doesn't work out exactly the way you're hoping to, come back and circle the wagons, do a little bit more research and thought into how you could improve, and come back the next year. And I think you'll see that you'll do better, and eventually you'll meet your goals, if not the first year.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Fatty, thanks for having me on, guys. Michael, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, that's it for this bonus episode. If you haven't yet subscribed, please head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts and sign up. And be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review.
Yeah, this is still a young podcast. So if you do that, it makes an enormous difference in whether other Leadville 100 racers and hopefuls can find us.
Now, train well, race hard, and we'll see you at the finish line this August.